In this lecture, we'll be making a dangerous swinging mace pendulum trap that will kill off any intruders that are trying to steal our treasure. So to create our pendulum swinging trap, I'm going to use the default cube as the kind of controller and create a kind of mace object attached to it. So I'll go to front view for this with 1 on my numpad. I'll move the cube up about 4 Blender units, so you can see that in the Z there. And let's create our mace. So Shift-A to add, mesh, cube. I'll scale that, but press Shift-Z so it's not in the Z axis, and move that upwards, probably somewhere around there, and scale a bit in the Z. So we've got this sort of handle for our mace, and then Shift-A to add, mesh, and then I'll have an icosphere. So it looks a little bit like a mace. I think the handle needs to be a bit chunkier, so I'll scale that, but Shift-Z, and just make it a little bit chunkier like that. Now these two objects I actually want to join together so they can be one object parented to our controller. Now it makes a little bit of difference which one is the highlighted or active object. It won't actually matter for our animation, but I'll show you why it makes a difference. If I press Ctrl J now to join these two objects together, it keeps the object origin of the active object, which was this top cube here. If I had had the sphere selected as my active object, the object origin would be down here. And that's the only difference that it will make. Now don't follow along with me, but if I were to animate my cube now before parenting the mace to the cube, and I'll quickly do that to show you what it looks like. I'll move my timeline up, press the record button, G then X, I'll move my cube over to this side, and we'll move forward 30 frames and G then X and move it across to this side. So we've got that animation. But if I now parent my mace object to the controller, so select the mace first, controller second, and Control P to parent, and then object, you can see that it keeps its current position and then animates accordingly. That's why it's generally good practice to do your parenting first and animation second. So I'll undo those steps so it goes all the way back. Select my mace object first, then my controller second, it's the active object because it's highlighted yellow, and Control P, set parent to object. Now when I move the top cube, it's going to move my mace. Now I've got the record button already activated, so I can press G then X and I'll move that -5. So the location is -5 and 30 frames on, and GX10, so it moves to +5 in the X. And we've got this very simple animation. I'll change the end of my animation to something like 50 and zoom in. I've given it a little bit more here, and you'll see why in just a moment. But now's a good time to catch up with me, parenting your mace object to the controller and creating the simple animation over about 30 frames. Pause the video and catch up with me. Okay, so what I need is, from the start, the controller object will move this way, but because it's dragging this mace object, as if it's on a sort of lever mechanism, the mace object will be left behind slightly as it moves forward, and then when it stops suddenly here, it will swing forward this way. So we'll do that in just a moment, but just before I do that, let's just quickly take a look at the outliner. I've got my cube selected here, but I can't see my mace object. I've selected it, but it doesn't appear in the outliner. Well, I'll just bring the outliner out slightly, and you can see that there's a mesh symbol just here that's highlighted. That's because if I click on the down arrow, we can see my cube inside this cube hierarchy. And it would be a good idea to rename these objects so it's not too confusing. I'll double click and call this mace, and the cube, I'll double click on that and call it controller. So when you parent an object to another, it creates a kind of collection type hierarchy. Anyway, let's jump back to the beginning. So the cube starts here. It'll take a moment to speed up and then suddenly stop here, but you can see it slows down as it comes to a stop at the end there. So have a quick think about how we can give it an abrupt stop. Hopefully you remembered you've got the graph editor where you can do those sort of things. If I press Control Tab, I can go across to the graph editor. I'll move that graph editor up slightly. We've got the object transforms here, and we only actually need the X location, so I'll delete the other ones. And that leaves us with this curve. And the Bezier handles at the top are making it slow down, as you can see there. Remember, steep curves are quick, shallow curves are slow. So the easy way of changing this is to click on that keyframe, V to change the handle, or I can come up to key and then handle type there, and I can change it to either vector or free. If I change it to vector, you can see it's now nice and sharp, and we can move this around if we want to continually speed up like this. But I'll leave it on the default for now, and we'll take a look and see what it looks like first. So I'll press spacebar, so it moves across the screen, but it's actually a little bit slow and it's not going to hurt any of the thieves that are trying to steal all our treasure. So I can select that keyframe, G then X to move it across to make it a bit quicker. See what it looks like now. Now that's much faster, and it stops fairly abruptly. Let's just quickly see what it looks like if we move this handle a little bit more, and then press spacebar. It really speeds up, and will catch those thieves out. So pause the video here and catch up with me, changing the handle type for the end keyframe of your controller's animation. Now, because we've shortened the animation, it's worth shortening our timeline. I'll go back to the timeline for that, so Control Tab, and I'll change the length to something like 30 instead. But we've still got a problem with the animation. It still looks very rigid. That's because our pendulum doesn't have any drag. So in the first few frames, when the controller moves, we need the pendulum to stay behind or drag behind here. So I'll select my pendulum. I'll go back to frame 0, and we'll want to set a keyframe here. But before I do that, I'll just turn off the record button for the moment and press R to rotate. You can see that the object origin is in the wrong place. So I'll right click to cancel that. We want to move the object origin to the top up here so it rotates like a pendulum. The easiest way to do that is go to Option, Affect Only Origins, G then Z, and move that origin up so it's somewhere around where it meets the controller. Do remember once you've done that to go to the options and turn off Affect Only Origins and to press your record button again. I'll press R and then left click so we've got our rotation recorded. Now we'll go forward to frame 20 and rotate it as if it's dragged behind. So it's dragging behind, and then the controller suddenly stops and it will fly forward at this point. So let's go 5 frames and see what that might look like. Something like this. So it drags behind, hits the end and flies forward. And then it's obviously going to swing like a pendulum at this point as it comes to a stop. But before I do that, it's a good time to catch up and create that first set of keyframes. Okay, so let's sort out the end. To do that, I'll have to elongate my timeline. So I'll go to 50 frames, just so I've got enough space and we can see a bit of rest. So it's taken 5 frames to move over there, and we want to have slightly less for when it goes the other way, and then slightly less again as it goes the other way, and not so high, slightly less again, and not so high, and slightly less again as it comes to a rest. And I can actually press Alt-R at that point. Now, it will swing that way, swing back, and slowly lose momentum. But notice I wasn't being very precise with these. I just know that they're going to get gradually shorter and less height to them. So I'm starting off fairly rough, and then I can make changes. But I know it's going to look something like this. Let's play it through and see what that looks like. It's not too bad, but it's a little bit quick the way it's swinging backwards and forwards. But it's only the last set of keyframes that I need to change, so have a quick think about how I can extend those out so it's not so quick. Okay, so hopefully you remembered, I can move my playhead to this point here, select these keyframes and press S to scale, and that will scale them out something like this. So I've gone to 42 frames. Let's see what that looks like. And that's not too bad. It seems to just about be working. It's a little bit quick at the bottom here, I would say, so I can probably move my timeline to here, select these and just scale them out a little bit. So it looks like we've now got 3 frames there and 2 frames at the end. It's not too bad. It's just a little bit abrupt at the end, so we can probably go a little bit that way and then back to the start like this. Let's try that again. And that looks okay. In reality, it would keep swinging for a long time. I'll do a little bit of play with this then and see if we can't make it look a little bit better. I've sped this up 3 times so it's not too dull to watch, but I'm just going through the keyframes and tinkering a bit, trying to space things out so it looks a little bit smoother. This is something you don't really have to do at this stage, and we'll talk more about animation techniques later on, and it's something you'll get a bit of a feel for with more experience. And I think I've managed to tidy it up just enough so it's acceptable. So hopefully you've picked up from that small experiment a bit more about parenting, a little bit about object origins, and a little bit about animation with drag and follow through. Your challenge, of course, is to catch up with me and animate this sort of swinging mace. You may want to tinker a little bit more, add a few more swings to it, and just extend out the animation as you see fit. We won't be using this file again, but make sure you saved your work if you want to keep a record. I'll see you in the next lecture.